Formula One, IndyCar, NASCAR, they've all got one thing in common. They're loud as hell. They burn fuel like there's no tomorrow. Basically, they've been doing the exact same thing for decades. And then you've got Formula E, silent, electric, supposedly the future of motorsport. Here's the thing that messes with my head though. Traditional racing series are absolutely smashing attendance records, signing billion-dollar TV deals. Meanwhile, Formula E is watched by like 3 people worldwide. What's actually the point of Formula E? To work this out, we'll take a look at why Formula E exists in the first place, what it promised versus what it actually delivered, and whether anyone actually gives a toss about watching cars that sound, well, like a blender. It all started on March 3rd, 2011, at some restaurant in Paris. FIA President Jean Todt was having lunch with Spanish businessman Alejandro Agag when Agag grabbed a napkin and started sketching. Not the next aerodynamic breakthrough or some revolutionary engine design, but the concept for an entirely electric racing series. This wasn't just some random idea over pasta though. By 2011, the automotive world was facing a proper crisis of relevance. Climate change was becoming impossible to ignore, cities were implementing emission restrictions. Suddenly, motorsport, the ultimate celebration of burning fossil fuels, looked like a relic from another era. The electric car revolution was sputtering along, but it had one massive problem: perception. Electric vehicles were seen as slow, boring golf carts for environmentalists. And come on, let's be honest about electric cars in 2011. They were absolute garbage. The Nissan Leaf had a range that would make a Tesla owner cry, about 73 miles on a good day. The Tesla Roadster existed, but it cost more than most people's houses. But something was shifting beneath the surface though. Tesla was working on the Model S. BMW was developing the i3. Governments worldwide were throwing money at EV development like it was going out of style. The writing was on the wall, even if most car enthusiasts were trying their best not to read it. Formula E emerged from this chaos with a mission that sounded almost impossible. Make electric cars cool. Make them fast. Make them relevant. Oh, and by the way, do it in city centers where people actually live, not on some remote racetrack that requires a road trip to reach. The timing was perfect in its imperfection. Electric cars were just credible enough to race, but not quite good enough to convince the masses. Formula E would bridge that gap or die trying.
All 5 lights are on. And we go green in Seoul. Pretty good start from Evans. Mitch Evans in third place, goes to the outside. Roland's getting swamped.
Creating a new motorsport series is like trying to start a new religion. You need believers, infrastructure, enough money to survive the early years when everyone thinks you're mental, and Formula E had one massive advantage. It attracted the right kind of mental. Alejandro Agag was a former politician with connections across the entire Europe and an absolute talent for separating investors from their money. The real genius move though, they convinced every major automotive manufacturer that they needed to be involved. Not because Formula E was guaranteed to succeed, but because being absent would be catastrophic if it did. Think about it from a manufacturer's perspective in 2012. Electric cars were the future. Everyone agreed on that. But which technology would win? Which approach was correct? Formula E offered something invaluable. A laboratory where they could test ideas under extreme conditions while millions of people watched. Audi, BMW, Mercedes, Jaguar, Porsche, they all saw the same thing. This wasn't just about racing, it was about establishing credibility in the electric future that was rapidly approaching, whether they were ready or not. On September 13th, 2014, the first Formula E race was about to begin in Beijing's Olympic Park, and honestly, nobody knew what to expect. The cars looked like something from a sci-fi movie, probably intentional. The sound was, well, different. Instead of the insane roar of engines, there was this high-pitched whine that sounded like a massive hairdryer.
I almost got in there.
To the left-hander of 6.
The real wild thing though, halfway through the race, drivers had to literally jump out of their cars and run to a second vehicle. Yes, you heard that right, the batteries couldn't last a full race distance, so Formula E solved this problem with the most ridiculous pit stop in motorsport history. Critics had a field day. This isn't racing, they said, it's musical chairs with really expensive cars. The car swap became a symbol of everything wrong with Formula E, proof that electric technology wasn't ready for prime time. Something strange happened during that first race though. Despite the technical limitations, despite the bizarre car swaps, despite everyone's low expectations, the racing was actually exciting. Nelson Piquet Jr. won that first race, becoming Formula E's first ever champion, but more importantly, Formula E proves something crucial. You could have genuine competition without the traditional elements that people assumed were essential. The car swap era lasted 3 seasons, and looking back, it might have been exactly what Formula E needed. It was so obviously flawed that it focused attention on the racing itself rather than getting bogged down in technical comparisons with F1. However, there was one genuine problem: FanBoost. Basically, fans could vote online for their favorite driver. The top vote getters would receive extra power during the race. It was gimmicky, sure. It was absolutely artificial, but it was also kind of brilliant from a marketing perspective. Suddenly, Formula E wasn't just asking fans to watch passively, it was asking them to participate. Drivers started building social media followings, not just for marketing purposes, but because it could literally affect their race results. The purists hated it, but I think FanBoost accomplished something traditional motorsport had been struggling with for years. It made fans feel like they mattered beyond just buying tickets and merch. If FanBoost was controversial, Attack Mode was, well, it was basically Mario Kart in real life. Drivers could activate a temporary power boost by driving through a specific zone off the racing line, trading track position for extra power that they could use later in the race. On paper, it sounded ridiculous. In practice, it added a layer of strategy that traditional motorsport had never seen. Drivers had to choose when to sacrifice immediate position for future advantage, and teams had to calculate the optimal timing for these power boosts. The gaming comparison wasn't accidental. Formula E was actively courting a generation that had grown up with video games, and Attack Mode spoke their language. Was it really more artificial than F1's DRS zones, which serve essentially the same purpose? Perhaps no criticism of Formula E has been more persistent than this sound issue. Racing fans are conditioned to expect a certain audio experience. The roar of engines, the pop of exhausts, the symphony of mechanical violence that makes traditional motorsports so great. Formula E offered none of that. Instead, there was this otherworldly whine like a dentist drill crossed with a sci-fi sound effect. Some found it fascinating. You could actually have a conversation trackside without wearing ear protection. Others found it soulless, like watching a movie with the soundtrack removed. The series tried to compensate by pumping music through speakers at events, creating this weird hybrid atmosphere that satisfied nobody, and this quickly became the biggest issue of Formula E, and there is kind of no way to solve it at all. Still, this racing series was eco-friendly and eclectic, and in 2012, it was all celebrities and media folks cared about. Leonardo DiCaprio co-founded a team, Richard Branson entered Virgin Racing, former NBA star Tony Parker invested in DS Techeetah. The series became a playground for celebrities who wanted to associate themselves with environmental consciousness while still enjoying the glamour of motorsport. However, it also reinforced the perception that Formula E was more about image than substance. When your biggest stories involve Hollywood actors rather than racing drivers, it suggests that the competition itself might not be compelling enough to stand alone. But still, Formula E, in my opinion, got one thing over traditional motorsport. Every Formula E race takes place on a street circuit or temporary track in a major city. Every single one. Like the Brooklyn street circuit brought racing to New York City for the first time in decades, the Paris E-Prix runs past some of the world's most famous landmarks. And that's just more fun. Yes, you could argue that this makes Formula E look like expensive bumper cars rather than professional motorsport. But I honestly think that wheel-to-wheel racing on challenging circuits is exactly what modern motorsport needs, especially compared to F1 circuits, where overtaking can be possible only with DRS, or not possible at all like Monaco. And by the way, I'm trying to open my DRS as well and fly past 30,000 subscribers this summer, so if you like this video so far, don't forget to subscribe. Despite all the gimmicks and controversies, something remarkable happened around Season 3. Manufacturers started taking Formula E seriously. Like, really seriously. Audi became a factory team, BMW partnered with Andretti, Mercedes announced their arrival, Porsche committed to the series, Jaguar returned to motorsport for the first time in decades, specifically to join Formula E. This wasn't tokenism or greenwashing. These companies were investing serious money and technical resources. Why? Because Formula E had become the only place to develop electric racing technology under competitive conditions. Traditional automotive development happens in laboratories and test facilities. Formula E offered something unique. The pressure of wheel-to-wheel competition combined with the scrutiny of global media coverage. If your battery management system failed during a race, millions of people would know about it. If your motor was inefficient, you'd finish last every weekend. This created a development environment that no amount of R&D spending could replicate in-house. Teams were essentially paying for the privilege of conducting product development under the most stressful conditions possible. That's exactly when Formula E starts to look a lot less pointless. The technology transfer to road cars has been genuine and significant. Jaguar claimed that Formula E development helped them increase the range of the I-Pace road car by 15%. BMW used lessons learned in Formula E to improve the efficiency of their I-Series vehicles. Audi's electric racing program directly influenced the development of the e-tron. So it was real, right? Formula E has proved that electric racing could be competitive and entertaining. It attracted major manufacturers, generated genuine technological advancement. It brought motorsport to new audiences and new locations. However, here's a stat that will either excite you or absolutely terrify you depending on your perspective. In Formula E's first 9 seasons, there were 8 different drivers' champions. 8 different champions! Compare that to Formula 1, where teams tend to dominate for decades at a time, or NASCAR, where the same handful of drivers dominate year after year. Formula E's championship has been so unpredictable that going into the season 7 finale, 18 different drivers still had a mathematical shot at the title. Or take a look at the Sebastian Buemi and Lucas di Grassi rivalry. These two drivers basically turned Formula E into their personal battlefield. The climax came at the Season 2 finale in London. Buemi and di Grassi arrived tied on points, meaning whoever finished ahead would become champion. Instead of a clean fight to the finish, they collided with each other, taking both out of contention for race positions. Here's where it gets weird though. They were still tied on points after the crash. The championship would be decided by whoever set the fastest lap. So while their cars were being recovered, both drivers were frantically calculating whether they had enough battery power to attempt a qualifying style lap on damaged vehicles. Buemi managed to set the fastest lap, won the championship, but the aftermath was pure Formula E chaos. Di Grassi accused Buemi of unsporting conduct. Buemi fired back that Di Grassi had been the aggressor. This made the series look a little amateurish, but come on, boys were just being boys. The following season, Di Grassi got his revenge, winning the championship while Buemi had a complete meltdown in Montreal, including a now legendary moment where he confronted other drivers in the pit lane over racing incidents.
I did like a crazy guy. It's either him or you. I'm sure it's you. You went on the inside. You touched me. You broke my steering. You hit me, man. You go crazy. You think you're better than anyone or what?
Just as Formula E was hitting its stride, disaster struck. Well, not exactly a disaster, but the manufacturers started leaving Formula E and leaving fast. First, Audi and BMW announced their departure after Season 7. Their reasoning? They'd learned what they needed to learn about electric racing technology. Then came the real shock. Mercedes announced they were leaving after Season 8. Not only were they leaving, but they were leaving as reigning champions in both the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships. Here's where the story gets interesting though. For every manufacturer that left, another one seemed ready to take their place. Maserati entered the fray, McLaren took over Mercedes' operation, ABT Sportsline returned as an independent team, the grid remained full, but the musical chairs of manufacturer involvement were looking kind of strange, to be completely honest. But if Formula E's primary value was being a technology incubator, what would happen when the technology matured? Well, I don't know that answer to this now, but right now it's definitely not mature enough. Like, take a look at the 2021 Valencia E-Prix. The problem was energy management, the delicate balance between speed and battery conservation that defines Formula E. Teams miscalculated how much energy their cars would need, or the regulations weren't clear enough, or both. The result was a complete disaster. Cars started running out of usable battery power. Drivers were limping around the track at walking pace, trying to conserve enough energy to reach the finish line. Others who exceeded energy limits were disqualified. By the end, only 9 cars managed to finish this disaster of a race. Nick de Vries won, but it was a hollow victory. The optics were terrible. Professional race cars crawling around a circuit like dying toys didn't exactly scream the future of motorsport. But here's the uncomfortable question that haunts every discussion about Formula E. Does anyone actually care? The series claims impressive viewership numbers, 491 million cumulative viewers for Season 10, up 35% year over year. One Monaco race drew 40 million viewers, supposedly the highest single race audience in Formula E history. These numbers need context though. Cumulative viewers can mean anything from people who watch entire races to those who saw highlights on social media. It's the kind of metric that sounds impressive but doesn't necessarily indicate genuine fan engagement. More telling might be the attendance figures at races, which Formula E rarely releases in detail. Some events look well attended on television, others appear to have significant empty grandstands. The series has experimented with free tickets, festival atmospheres to boost attendance, suggesting that demand isn't as strong as the TV numbers might indicate. But perhaps Formula E's most significant challenge is generational. The series was designed to appeal to younger, more environmentally conscious audiences who might find traditional motorsport outdated or irrelevant. This strategy has had mixed results. Younger fans are indeed more likely to attend Formula E events and engage with the series on social media, but it's also created a divide. Older motorsport fans often dismiss Formula E as a gimmick designed for people who don't understand real racing. Formula E exists in a weird middle ground, too artificial for traditionalists and too niche for mainstream audiences. It's found its tribe, but that tribe isn't large enough to make the series a cultural phenomenon. Strip away all the drama, controversy, marketing, and Formula E's strongest argument for relevance is technological. The progression from Gen 1 to Gen 3 cars tells the story of rapid technological advancement. Battery capacity doubled, power outputs increased dramatically, energy efficiency improved to the point where over 90% of battery energy reaches the wheels, a figure that would make any internal combustion engine weep. More importantly, these advances have translated to road cars. The regenerative braking systems pioneered in Formula E now appear in mainstream EVs. In my opinion, Formula E's biggest problem might be that it doesn't quite know what it wants to be. Is it a technology showcase pretending to be an entertainment series? Is it a genuine sport that happens to use electric cars? Is it an environmental statement with racing attached? The series has elements of all three, but the mixture creates confusion.
And then a few just sort of slither wide. Oh, and then a couple of big hits at the back, sort of out of and then everyone piles in at the back. Very weird accident that.
If the point is technological advancement, Formula E has been unquestionably successful. The series has accelerated electric vehicle development by creating a competitive environment that pushes innovation in ways that laboratory testing cannot replicate. Road cars are better because Formula E exists. If the point is future-proofing motorsport, the jury is still out. Formula E has brought racing to new audiences, new locations, but it hasn't achieved the cultural penetration that would make it a mainstream phenomenon. It remains a niche interest, with passionate but limited following. If the point is environmental responsibility, Formula E is mostly successful, but not perfect. The series demonstrates that high-performance electric vehicles are viable and exciting, which helps combat negative perceptions of EVs. But the massive logistical footprint of hauling equipment around the world for city center races somewhat undermines the environmental message. However, in my personal opinion, Formula E has also failed to achieve some of its more ambitious goals. It hasn't replaced traditional motorsport in the cultural consciousness, it hasn't solved the fundamental challenges of electric vehicle adoption, it hasn't created a sustainable business model that eliminates dependence on manufacturer investment or government support. The series exists in a perpetual state of becoming rather than being. It's always on the verge of breakthrough success or catastrophic failure. With all of this being said, I don't think the future of motorsport is electric, and with manufacturers rolling back EV production, I think we'll be hearing petrol engine noises for a while longer. But you know what? It's good to have an electric racing series because even though I might think it's pointless, someone else might like it. And that's the entire point of any sport, right? Let me know if you've ever watched Formula E races down in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe.